Renegade River in Spring Lake wants to buy your used handguns and hunting guns. Renegade River, your hunting, camping, and survival store. Stop in and check out their new and used firearms, sporting goods, Army and Navy supplies, and survival gear. Downtown Spring Lake, next to the police station.
The Talk of Muskegon. News Talk 1090, WKBZ.
Welcome. You're listening to the Renegade River Show. My name is Mike Hewitt, and we're in today with Jim Riley, who is going to enlighten us on Obamacare.
I am prepared to shine the light of truth, little historical perspective.
And I'm telling you, folks.
And other stuff.
His 3 years of show prep before the show began today, he was just vicious to anyone that interrupted him.
Vicious. Yes. We are vicious when we are trying to prepare the American public for this vicious fraud that has been dropped upon us. We're going to talk about Obamacare.
Tell us.
Well, you'd asked, because I have a unique situation, as it turns, in terms of my experience in trying to get my own health care, because I am one of the, I understand now it's at least 2 million. There may be many millions more to come, but I have received a letter from my current health insurance company saying that because of federal regulations that they will not be able to provide me with my current plan, which I'm very happy with, and that I must get a new one. So I've been on this Obamacare website ever since it began, because it is important for me to make sure that I am not without insurance and have to pick up the any emergency costs that come about. But, you know, Mike, you had asked me to do a little, to talk about this, and if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of start at the beginning and give some historical perspective so that we can get a sense of how we got from where we were not that many years ago to where we are today. And one thing we do know, even those who've kind of put their head in the sands, trying to avoid political conversation and the like, if you turn on Leno or you turn on Saturday Night Live, and now even if you're turning on the Daily Show and others, the president and those people he has appointed to run this debacle, now known as Obamacare. Wouldn't surprise me that they try to change the name. But this mess, they're being mocked, not just by conservatives and Republicans, but they're being mocked by those on the left who are professional jokesters, those who mock for fun, and historically have had a lot more fun with Republicans than they have with Democrats. But one thing we do know is that this current version of government health care doesn't just pretend to supply health care and the like, and we'll talk about those specifics in a moment, but it is a transfer of power, a taking of power from the citizens of this country and giving it to government functionaries and bureaucrats. And of course, one of the simplest takings of power is telling us that we no longer have the power as Americans in the United States of America to pick our own health care plan if the federal government so desires that we don't have that choice. So they've taken that power from us. And it would be one thing if they took the power from us and they said, well, but we're going to give you something of equal value. But turns out that's not the case. The only real net result is that they have, at least at this point, a whole lot more power than we do. And so my quest to find health insurance will follow in a sec. But how did we really get here? Well, anyone who has been ill or had to go to a hospital, go to a doctor's office, knows that either you paid cash for it, which very few people do, but you paid cash because you had no insurance. You had an insurance provider if you worked for the government, you worked for a powerful union, you were a high-level executive. Chances are you had very little copay or deductibles. You didn't even really need to know what those words meant because you went to the doctor, you went to the hospital, you hardly got any bills, you hardly got any paperwork at all. If you were in Medicare or Medicaid, Medicare for older people, Medicaid for what we would call poor people, those who qualify for it, you might have some copays for Medicare. Medicaid, it's totally free. So not that many people really experienced what dealing with insurance companies was like, that would include copays and deductibles and the various limits to coverage and things of that sort. Now, The problem is that is complicated, and it is expensive if you're going to pay for your own health care. And for many, many years, Oscar, you may remember back in the good old days, not that many years ago, but all of the politicians were running around saying, "Oh, what we need is Canadian-style health care." Remember that friendly phrase, those wonderful Nanuks of the North where they're really efficient, wonderful health care? Well, nobody uses that term anymore because the Canadian health care system is in abject collapse. And it's in such collapse that the Canadian government just, I think about 2 years ago, voted to make a significant change that, interestingly, is being considered the reverse for this country. In Canada, if you were in the medical world, a physician, a nurse, a hospital, clinic, you had to be part of the Canadian health plan system, and that's what they call single payer. So in other words, it was just free. Anybody who walked in the door got paid for free. Now, that's the good news. It was free, but the bad news is, of course, if you need something tricky, something that requires maybe a specialist at a high level, if you didn't want to wait months and months and months for cancer surgery for your children, you would pick up your children and you'd hop in a car and you'd come to the United States. And so the system worked wonderfully in Canada as long as there was a big, stupid country to its south that would provide the expensive services, medical services necessary. Well, as it turned out, more and more physicians, certainly the top physicians, those who could, were moving their practices just across the border. They were servicing not just Americans, but they were servicing Canadians. And the Canadian people were so unhappy with the fact that all the good doctors were leaving, that all the good hospitals were across the border, that they had to wait months and months and months, in some cases years, for services that we would, here in this United States, expect to get within a week or two, that they did make a change and said, look, physicians, if they would like to in Canada, hospitals, if they would like to, can opt out of the Canadian healthcare system, and people who want to contract with them will be able to do so. So that's a big change that Canada has made. Unfortunately, in the United States, there's already been a state representative, Democrat, of course, who is pushing for a requirement that every physician, every nurse, every hospital, every clinic in the United States become part of this national health system. And, of course, this first little foray into single-payer, totally government-controlled health care will not go far initially, but that's the plan. That's the President of the United States, Barack Obama, has said, I would like to have what they call single-payer, Canadian-style health care at some point down the future. But people were unhappy. Even in this country, people were unhappy because it was expensive. Healthcare was expensive. It was cumbersome to fill out the paperwork. Even amazingly, for those people who did have VA, employer insurance, Medicare, there was still paperwork that people did not like. And of course, there was the fact that, as we've been told, and I'm not so sure that this is an accurate number, but we've been told that there were 30 million uninsured Americans. Now, these Americans were not Americans who weren't getting health care. They could walk into any hospital in the country and demand health care and get it, but they didn't have insurance. So in most cases, the hospitals weren't getting paid. So there was a lot of complaint that, hey, we need a better system. And of course, not so many years ago, the best system was that Canadian-style health care. And then we heard, well, geez, the French have got a great health plan, and the Swedes have got wonderful health care plans. And as the focus started to become a little clearer on how these foreign health care plans worked, they kept changing around. Certainly nobody talks about the British health care plan, and most of the European health care plans that were earlier mentioned now seem not to be set up as the ultimate goals. But there's this view from many folks in government that, hey, we need something new. And, of course, we've been promised hope and change, and we voted for it twice. We must say President Obama didn't get to be president by mistake. Americans voted for him. So we ended up with a situation which, and Oscar and Mike, I don't know, and jump in here at any time, but have we ever seen a plan this large, this important, this big in terms of affecting citizens, where only one party voted for it? Because
I've got to jump in a little bit, Jim. There's a handful of points you've caused me to I've been writing over here like a madman while you were
always
talking.
jump in. Jump in.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Yeah, it is the Mike Hewitt Renegade River show, last I heard.
Here's the graduation we're going through. Initially, in fact, Oscar, you're welcome to grab a mic. You and I, once upon a time on one of our shows, talked about pre-existing condition, and you and I were at odds. And so I did a little bit of research on that point. And in the beginning of the Obamacare, the crusade that was 2009, 2008, the battle cry was exactly that. We need to get people that had pre-existing conditions.
Yes, that was a big
covered.
negative. Yeah,
that's what this was supposed to solve.
Yes.
So this morning, my idea of show prep was I wanted to look for talking points from the Democrat side of this, and one of the things I found was it's from the New Yorker, and specifically NewYorker.com. It was obviously before all of the cancellations, including yours, and it shows 80% of Americans will be unaffected. It says largely people who keep their current employer plan. 80%. These people will not be affected by Obamacare. Now we know that has obviously been proven to be totally, completely false.
Correct.
The title of the NewYorker.com article that I pulled, it said there will be winners and losers, and we've heard that in the news over the last couple of weeks that there will be winners and losers. New Yorker posed it this way: 80% will be unaffected, 3% will be losers, people who will have to buy higher quality health care plans with no annual cap. That's what they're referring to, and it's for people like you. And keeping in mind that the president referred to the people that would cancel you as bad apple insurers.
Yes.
So at 64 years old, you must have prenatal care as part of your health care, and if it doesn't, then you're going to get canceled. Any deviation is a cancellation, even if it's a $5 deviation. Your policy by federal law has to be canceled.
Wait, let's not forget. Come on now. I get, if I'm so inclined, I get birth control pills too. Free.
That's obviously very important to a single 63.
Could be.
64
might take them up to Canada and sell them.
But when you read through it, you think, okay, clearly these folks are not stupid. They know that this plan was going to come undone. So I sit back and I think about Oscar's position because he's right. The reason I never got rejected is that I've always been part of a group plan for employers. That's why I was never rejected. That's not been the case for the employment path you chose. And so I said, okay, could we have resolved Oscar and those folks that fell into his category? Could we have resolved it with one or two ways? A, you probably would have got bipartisan support to say that there must be some clauses for pre-existing conditions. Or if we didn't want to take that path, and if we wanted to take the Obamacare type path, we could have said to Oscar, bring us 3 rejection letters, and if you've been formally rejected and can't get coverage, we'll make you part of an existing federal program.
Ooh, that's a common sense, simple choice. Well, and I love that option.
Instead of giving Oscar and those folks that were rejected 1 or 2 or 3 options, we've decided to flip the entire apple cart upside down, making not the insurers the bad apples, but in truth our federal government, because I believe they wantingly, knowingly did this. And listen, I've got a little subnote for myself here, and then I'll get off my soapbox. The subnote is that we are on the path to universal health care. We're also on the path to another presidential election, and a lady will be a candidate who once upon a time was a crusader for universal health care. So she's going to swoop in and jump off her broom and save us with her plan. That'd be Hillary Clinton, or Shrillery Clinton with a K, as I've always affectionately referred to her as.
Well, if you think back, if you do the homework, and I have vague memories of these times too, but I did a little research on this. One of the main reasons that Hillary Care, which is what it was called derisively back when Bill and Hillary were trying to pull their version of nationalized, socialized health care on the country, one of the biggest negatives, and arguably the most compelling one, because there was a wonderful TV ad, I think it was Ethel and Herb, or there were the husband and wife talking about the plan. And did you know that you wouldn't be able to keep your physician, you wouldn't be able to keep your hospital, and that really. That was the truth, of course, about the Hillary Care as was presented by the Clinton administration, and that was compelling enough. The argument against that was compelling enough to dump it. The people who were behind Obamacare understood that that was an important issue for Americans today, the ability to keep your same physician, to be able to go to the same hospital that you've been able to go to, and if in fact you had your own health care plan, to keep it. So they said, you're going to be able to keep your physician, you're going to be able to keep your hospital, you're going to be able to keep your same health care plan. That turns out not to have been in error, not to be a slip of the tongue. That turns out to have been an abject, very specifically crafted lie.
See, I just called it a bold-faced lie.
Well,
you get pretty creative with your niceties. It's
it was crafted. It was crafted in order to get this bill passed. And let's go to the next step here, because I do want to ultimately get into where Americans are coming soon, which is trying to get onto this website. But in many cases, and sadly it's true, in too many cases, Americans will say, oh my gosh, those Democrats, those Republicans, the political parties are all the same. Well, in many cases it is true. In this case, it is not. We know it was a very big arguments going over the Gulf War under George W. Bush. Most of the Republicans, most of the Democrats voted to support the war. There was a split between them. Some people voted against it, but there were Republicans and Democrats on both sides. In this case, 100% of the Democrats voted for the Obamacare bill, the one that Nancy Pelosi said you have to pass in order to know what's inside it, and 100% of the Republicans voted against it. And that's a significant difference, and it ought to be important to people who care about going forward. Do the political parties matter? And then we got a break coming up, and we'll jump into it when we come back.
Folks, we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show. I'm Mike Hewitt, in with Jim Riley. Jim, let me tell you this about that. This is from Forbes. I know there are a lot of folks that don't exactly like Forbes on the other side of the aisle.
Oh, that's true, because Forbes tells it like it is, baby.
More Americans in just 3 states have had their insurance canceled under Obamacare than have filed in all of the exchanges of all 50 states and on Obamacare directly. Just filed. By the way, we get to work on the word filed, because there's a new definition for that word nowadays. So it's not actually made an application for or actually have. It's got to that screen, which I'm going to guess you'll tell us about at some point.
Yeah, I'll just allude to it just a little bit here. That is, they use the term filing in the same way that you would use the term maybe clicking on NBC Today show. You want to see what's on the main page, and then maybe you'll go forward, but you're not going to spend the whole day on the NBC Today show website. The problem with Obamacare is that nobody knows anything about it, so the only way that you can find out about it is to get on the website. So that's people who are just simply looking to see, maybe I can get a better deal. Maybe maybe I've heard so much about this website, maybe I'd like to take a peek at it. They call those filers. Those are not in any way the normal, the way you and I would speak. Those are not people interested in filing for insurance. But you mentioned something just before the break, and that talked about the numbers of people who were in theory uninsured, and that was a very prime motivator by Americans in supporting the Democrat Party and supporting President Obama in bringing out this new national health care plan in order to provide insurance for those who did not have it. The problem with that is that, number one, it really amounts to a very small group, and you came up with a great idea to handle folks who did have problems getting insurance because of expensive insurance because they might have had some pre-existing conditions. But think about this. If you are poor by national government standards, you are eligible for Medicaid. Your insurance is free. If you are 65 or older, you are eligible, everybody is eligible, for Medicare. If you are a military veteran, you have Veterans Administration insurance. And if you are employed with an employer that has health care insurance, which is certainly the big companies, you are covered by your employer insurance. So the poor, the old, military vets, and most of the employed already have insurance. So we are not talking a huge number of people that really have this need. And of that 30 million, and this has been studied in any number of cases, of that 30 million, it kind of breaks down in groups of 10 million each of folks who do not have or did not have health insurance. Now, they all had health coverage. They all had to be covered no matter what if they went to the hospital. But it broke down this way. About 10 million were people who were eligible for Medicare or Medicaid, but just had not signed up. Most cases would be Medicaid. Poor people who didn't, I'm not going to sign up. They didn't have the wherewithal. They didn't have the interest. They would show up at a hospital. They would say, I don't have insurance. They were check marked off as someone who doesn't have insurance. But in fact, they just had not applied for Medicare or Medicaid or any of the other available insurances. Another 10 million were people who were between jobs, or they were young people who had left their parents' insurance and did not have insurance for any period of time. Most of those people tended to be transitory. In other words, they didn't have insurance for a week, a month, a year, maybe even a couple of years, but they very shortly thereafter were able to get insurance. And there was another 10 million that makes up this total of 30 million of people who just said, hey, I'd rather spend the money on cable TV or new Nike shoes or what have you. I don't want to get insurance. Maybe I'm young. Young people tend to believe they're bulletproof. Maybe they just said, hey, what the heck? I don't have assets. If I get in a car accident, they're going to take care of me anyway and let them sue me. They can't go after me. That's actually a fairly logical response for someone to say, I'm going to avoid paying, $200, $300, $500, $1,000 a month for health insurance.
I got to tell you, Jim, when you look at the percentages of people that had legitimate issues, like Oscar with being rejected with a pre-existing condition, the percentage of Americans that we're talking about is really small.
Correct.
Like less than 2%. No, but just I want to...
And it could have been fixed with common sense, concepts, common sense brainstorming like you just came up with right here this morning.
But listen, the fact that they didn't come up with some really obvious solutions to 1 or 2% of the public's issues with this tells you that wasn't their goal. Making it so that Oscar could have affordable health care insurance was not their goal. Then you got to stand back and say, okay, well, all of these numbers that they presented, all of them, they knew it was a lie. We've seen memos that were issued before the law came into effect that from the White House that talked about the fact that there were going to be a lot of people getting canceled. They knew the storm was coming, and they proceeded. So rational thinking says these things were darts they were willing to take on a path to a different direction. But listen, I want to pause for just a second and get and touch on something different. One of the things we're hearing a lot in the last week to 10 days is some talking points from the Democrat Party and those forget party alliance, those who support Obamacare or in truth support a single-payer health care policy, which is really what we're inevitably talking about.
Single-payer, by the way, just for you folks out there, is government-provided health care, just like they have in Canada to most of Europe, where you walk in the door, you do not pay a penny, there's no billing, you just walk right in the door. Great, free is great, but the service is terrible, the waits are long, and of course the physicians and everybody else moves elsewhere. But single-payer means government pays is the only payer.
Yeah, I got to tell you, a just real brief insight here is if you really wanted to know what single payer meant, I hope those listeners that listened to Jana Kanechi describe healthcare in the Soviet Union, not Russia, the Soviet Union pre-1992, she described healthcare perfectly on the path of what it is that Obama wants and what Hillary will be pushing for. But the talking points Democrats of late have been pushing are the decline in health care costs. They're attributing the fact that health care has stopped going up in terms of expense. They're tying that directly to the Obamacare law, when the reality of it is something absolutely, totally different. I've got a graph in front of me. It shows that health care costs peaked in 2002 and have really, really slowly started to segue down. But even this graph is a little bit deceiving because what it's really actually measuring is that healthcare has stopped going up. So what it's measuring from year to year is the lack of projected growth. And the reason these things are important is because what the healthcare costs are reacting to as they start to stymie and maybe head downhill is they're reacting to the tight economy that we've had, which tells folks that means healthcare truly is market driven. If we would have had a robust economy, it would have continued to segue up. The trend going down or stagnating happened long before the law was even signed into being. And in truth, it started to decline before Obama was even elected. And everyone likes to say it was Bush's fault. it could be said that this is Bush's fault if we're going to tie it to the economy, because the prices of healthcare started segueing down back in the middle of 2008. It's a market-driven item, and as long as we come up with things like single payer or Obamacare, in truth, the third-party payer system you alluded to in the first segment, you were talking about the fact that folks don't see the bills come in the mail, and that's been a problem, because what happens is that Americans have grown used to not having to shop. Now, yes, I use that word. They've not been forced to shop for best quality, best care. I had someone ask me when I was talking on this topic once. Actually, they didn't ask me, they declared, that's my insurance's responsibility to shop for best quality, best care. Absolutely not. The insurance company doesn't care. If you're willing to pay $9 for a cotton ball, they're going to charge whatever percentage they want for profit above that, and if you're willing to pay the premium or able to, it becomes a vicious cycle. And it's the analogy I've used many times about going to the local car dealership and looking at a Ford Focus, and how much is that one? And the salesman says it's $5 million, and you say, holy mackerel, that's a lot of money. Salesman says, don't worry about it, you're not paying for it. That really is how we've gotten to where we're at with $9 cotton balls.
Yes, I agree, except I think you're missing one of the bigger employers out there, or one of the bigger consumers of health insurance, and that is the employers. And they were heavily incentivized to reduce their cost of health care, because it was, again, they were paying the bill. If you worked for Ford, or if you worked for Morgan Stanley, or if you worked for Microsoft, you didn't really care necessarily what their costs were, because they were picking them up. In the early part of the last decade, and certainly in this decade, corporations who were providing this insurance were saying, no, we're not going to pick up these costs willy-nilly unencumbered any longer. They were the main reasons for the reduction in this growth of healthcare. They started saying, no, you're going to, instead of having like many of the UAW unions had no copay whatsoever, no copay for pharmaceuticals, for any doctor visits or any visits at all. No deductibles. They started initiating deductibles, copays. It's been proven time and again that when you ask somebody to pay just a little bit, they think twice about going to the hospital. They think twice about going to the Walgreens and getting the insurance. It wasn't just the corporations either that were looking twice. It was Medicare and Medicaid under pressure from the Bush administration, and I would imagine similar pressure from the Obama administration, to stop accepting any kind of charges that came from hospitals and from physicians and from the various clinics that were out there. They were all of a sudden saying, wait a minute, just because you billed us doesn't mean we're going to pay it. So the real consumers, and there were real consumers, even though the bulk of us didn't feel it ourselves, the real consumers were the corporations that started looking at what they were paying, and the governments that were providing the various healthcare insurance policies.
Jim, I partly agree with you, but where I have to part on that, some differences. Going back to, I remember Lee Iacocca, when he was still running Chrysler, complaining that the single largest cost that they attributed to the price of a vehicle was health insurance. So these large companies you're talking about, like Lee Iacocca and Chrysler Motors back then, they just put it into the price of the car. Just like Ragu, it's in there. And, the other side of the coin is that over the last decade or so, where I've been involved in a general management level of larger dealerships, I've sat in countless annual meetings with first management and insurance representatives that were selling us big group policies, and then inevitably with the employee pool at the various companies that I'd worked for. And what was taking place in those is each year we had to sit down and explain to the employee pool that their contribution to the cost was going up.
Exactly. And that's why their use of the product went down.
Well, it did go down,
and that results in reduced expenditures in healthcare.
But here's where what caused it to go down was their premiums. The premium went up, but the deductibles went up.
Absolutely.
So, for instance, I've got $1,000 deductible. That's a year. That causes. I'm in November. I have not went beyond my deductible yet.
Neither have I.
Because I mean, to me, going to the doctor now. You talked about how you didn't get much paperwork. Going to the doctor now, I get a plethora of paperwork and bills from companies I've never even heard of before. That's the
This has
problem
all
with it.
begun about 10 years ago when healthcare prices started to take off and corporations started to say, look, we're not going to eat it all. We're going to increase these deductibles. We're going to increase the annual, the monthly premiums that the employees pay. That all makes sense. But if you don't mind, I'd like to just move on a little bit because we have a situation here now where with these plans going forward, there are some very significant downsides. And as we now know, Nancy Pelosi, who at the time was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, said, you have to pass this plan, in other words, to the Republicans, in order to know what's inside it. We now know that what was inside this plan, only to be found out after the fact, was the fact that very specifically, you could not keep your physician, you could not keep your hospital. You could not keep the health care plan if you wanted to keep it, even though we know that, of course, the President of the United States lied. We've got to love video these days and YouTube because we now see, like Richard Nixon, I am not a crook. That's kind of hard to find, but President Obama lying is almost an everyday occurrence, and now we have the videos of those. But the biggest problem is, and this just came out this past week, 3 years ago, the Republicans in the Senate, which is where this bill was being crafted, this is after it had passed, the Republicans brought up a resolution that said, we want to make sure, because we now have read this bill, we want to make sure that the people in the United States will be able to keep their physician, keep their hospital, keep their health care plan. 100% of the Democrats voted to keep that resolution from making it to the floor of the Senate for a vote. So this concept that nobody knew, that you couldn't keep your hospital, couldn't keep your physician, couldn't keep your health care plan, that everyone, certainly all the Democrat senators that are running around said, oh my golly, I didn't know that. They not only knew it, they voted 100% against the resolution that would have allowed it to go forward.
Jim, have you ever noticed that none of these socialist programs will work without force?
Yeah.
They can't make any of their programs a choice. You will do it because they know if it's not a bold-faced force, active aggression, that they'll be left alone. How many people on day one actually signed up? 6?
Well, no, it's. I think it's even at this point it's 6. But let me add one other big time lie, which I just caught this morning watching Fox News. Kathleen Sebelius, when she was being grilled this past week by the House of Representatives, I believe, was asked, why did you push this thing, this Obamacare website, why did you push this thing through so quickly? She said, because the law required it to be put into place on a particular date. Well, since no one in that room apparently had read the bill either, that seemed to fly until they found out, checking out, that in fact the date that the Obamacare website was to go live was to be set by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. In other words, not only did she either lie or she's just too darn stupid to be in that position and ought to get canned either way, but she made up the reason why she felt she was under the gun.
Folks, we're going to go to a break. We'll be right back on that note. Welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show. I'm Mike Hewitt in with Jim Riley. Jim, tell us what's wrong with Obamacare. It sounds like you don't like it.
Well, you know what? Everybody seems to like free, and then quite often with government free, you find out the rest of the story, and it turns out that perhaps even at free, it's not a good deal. And of course, it isn't free. But I would like to just hit a couple of things of where are we at this point? What's wrong with this at this point? Well, number one, the President of the United States lied to the country numerous times about what was in this bill. We now find just this past week, just a couple days ago, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the person charged by the President of the United States to roll out this initial step of Obamacare, which of course is the website. We know that clearly she's either lying or she's such a moron that she said publicly that she had no choice in what day to roll out Obamacare, when in fact very clearly it states that she has the absolute and sole authority to determine the rollout date. A few other things that we're finding out. Of course, it's a Canadian firm that had been hired to build this website. The initial costs were to be $70 to $90 million. It's so far now, looks like they're well over $500 million. And it also turns out that some friends of Michelle Obama, Michelle Obama's college classmates, happen to be senior executives over at this lovely, wonderfully efficient website development firm, which interestingly had been fired by the country of Canada for failing to build a few other websites there. So in other words, they were desperate for business. I wouldn't be at all surprised that they gave a significant bonus to hire Michelle Obama's cronies as executives, and not surprisingly, they got this contract.
There was some campaign contributions in there, but just 1 second. Have you noticed that during the Bush administration, the extreme left, the shrill left, as I call them, were screaming constantly about Bush doing contracts with people and companies. Halliburton was like the starring example, but there were a whole series of,
yes,
they knew them, he knew him, they knew them. Nobody's saying a word about this but you and me.
Well, again, in going along with these lies that we know were told, the media has been complicit. The media, certainly, they have a responsibility to have known 3 years ago the vote to make sure that people could keep their own health care.
What media?
Well, there's a huge media called ABC, CBS, NBC, NPR, PBS, CNN, MSNBC, and the rest.
The
media
channel,
is there.
The National Brock Channel.
Well, we don't like them, but they're out there, and they pretend to be looking out on our behalf. And we now know clearly they have not done that. But here's another interesting little point that came out. A gentleman whose firm, he runs a firm, has just been hired. Now, he was one of the original people that made the determination to hire the Canadian firm. Good friend of Barack Obama, one of the biggest bundlers, in other words, one of the biggest fundraisers for Barack Obama's presidential runs. His wife was given an ambassadorship some years ago, and he just got a new contract to essentially be in charge of finding a replacement for this Canadian firm. So it's all the same insider, crony, thug-style deals that you would expect with Chicago-type politicians continues on. But what are the big negatives of this plan at this point? Well, the biggest one, other than the fact that this website doesn't work, and folks, at some point the website's going to work. It's not that complicated, even though they've already spent over $500 million. But the biggest problem that we are going to find is, of course, that people are going to make choices with their health care plans. And you've heard that there's a penalty if you don't have a health insurance plan that's been approved by the federal government. If you do not have that plan, it's $95 a year is your penalty, or 1% of your income, whatever's the highest. Next, that's for 2014. That's just a few months from now. But guess where it goes in the next year, the 2015? It goes from $95 up to $325 is the penalty. And in just a little more than 2 years, the penalty, if you say, look, I can't afford these deductibles, I can't afford the health care insurance, the penalty is $695. So what you're going to have, think about this, how many people are actually going to pay $695 and get nothing? Is the federal government going to go after them? Are we going to have a new army, a vast army of Obamacare enforcers?
It's called the IRS.
Well, now, guess what? Well, if you don't have the money, how are they going to get it? But maybe they will. Maybe we'll have debtors' prisons.
It will come from your tax return.
Well, again, if you don't, we'll find out.
But hang on for a second. All jokes aside, if you're a single parent with a child, even if you didn't work, you're going to have a federal tax return. Now, I don't know how they get the word return fitted in there, but you're going to get one. Well, but if you've elected not to sign up, you're only going to get a part of it.
Well, what you're saying is clearly that you don't know what they're going to do. I don't know what they're going to do, and they're not telling us what they're going to do. But I know this. Very few people are going to pay $700 a year and not get any insurance. Now, here's another issue. Most of these insurance policies that you get, and this is what I've seen when I've been on the website, the only ones that are really affordable to most people have very significantly high deductibles. A standard, relatively low deductible policy is going to cost over $1,000 a month for a single person. Most of the policies that I'm seeing available in Michigan, there's, I believe, 31 choices that are available to me, have deductibles anywhere between $2,500 and $6,500. Now, here's the problem. How many people who are going to be rushed to an emergency room have $2,500 just sitting around, or $6,500, and again, this is for a single person, available to give to the hospital or to the physician before they're treated. Now, we know that these hospitals are required by law to treat people in an emergency. And we don't really know what's going on with people who may think that they've got cancer, they've got a pain inside themselves, and they need to be tested for who knows what. Are the hospitals going to say, well, fine, we're very happy, we'll probably be all perky and cheerful and nice and clean, wearing the nice starched uniforms? Are they going to say, we'd love to talk to you, but you've got to give us that $2,500 check first? We are going to, this entire Obamacare plan, one of the benefits was to make sure that those people who didn't have lots of money were going to be covered. So you've either got to have that $95 this year, or next year, $325 in a little more than a year, and in a little more than 2 years, either $695, or you're going to have that deductible and copay up front. We don't know what's going to happen with that. Another big problem.
What we do know, though, is that just like the old program, it's like when we went through the just gone through the old Snyder, Michigan Medicaid explosion, and some of the rationale used by people like Amanda Price, the state representative down in the 89th District. The rationale that those folks used was that it's more expensive to have a person go through the emergency room rather than through a doctor's office, when the reality of, and to your point, a $2,500 or a $6,500 deductible is going to achieve the exact same goal. But where I'm going at slowly, one of the reasons that the Obama sign-up has been so dismally low is there's been a huge surge in people applying for Medicaid. Well,
that we know that many of the people who have gone on, again, the determinations of availability for Medicaid as opposed to the Obamacare is self-described. In other words, you put in your income there, and of course the federal government has said that we're not going to verify. So if no matter what you say, they're going to believe it. And of course, if you just reduce your income enough, then all of a sudden they're going to say, bingo, you got Medicaid. But I would say that very few people have experienced what you just suggested, because nobody can get through on the internet in order to even get to that point. I'm not aware of anyone in the entire state of Michigan who's gotten to that point. So I think that's a lot of talking heads making up stuff, because you cannot find out if you're eligible for Medicaid until you've gone through the site, and the site doesn't work in Michigan.
Well, a couple things though, Jim. First, if you say that Obama has said they're not going to verify income, you have to remember that Obama has also said that the IRS is going to be doing the management of this. So clearly,
at some point they're going to change that, but not this year.
No, but in the interim, you're right. Nobody that we're aware of has actually successfully been able to get Obamacare, and then here's the key part: use it. So we have no idea how it's going to function, other than hope that works better than everything else about it. But what we do know is that the enrollment for Medicaid has shot up dramatically nationwide.
That may be, again, that's a statistic that I've tried to verify, and I don't trust at this point. I've not seen that to be a true statistic, but we do know that as more people are getting involved, people are saying, hey, sign up for Medicaid. But let me just add, to me, the worst thing here. Very soon we are going to see interviews on TV of people like myself. And they're going to say, oh, my gosh, I finally got through. I've got my Obamacare, and I just love it. In my case, my health insurance is going to go from about $300 a month to $16.50 a month. Now, it's not going to be as good a plan as I had, but it's not too much different. The problem is, because I have savings instead of a pension, I have a relatively low income. If you are a single person and you have up to $46,000, if you have less than $46,000 worth of income, you get a subsidy from the government. If you're a family of four, you get a subsidy if you have an income of under about $91,000, $92,000. The problem is, these subsidies are going to make happy people out of many of us. Matter of fact, most people, single people, do not make $46,000 a year, and most families of four do not make $91,000 a year. These subsidies are going to be in the hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. This lie that it was going to save money is a flat-out lie.
I can tell you this: I've enjoyed watching man on the street interviews of people that have discovered for the first time that having Obamacare isn't free.
Oh, and for those people who make above it, it's going to be double, triple, quadruple what they're currently paying. You bet. It's wrong at so many levels.
Yeah, there's some progressives. I mean, they got the deer in the headlights, absolutely stunned look. What do you mean they're going to charge us? They're going to charge us what?
You're a single person making $80,000. You're probably going to pay 3 times what you're currently paying in your monthly bill.
And your deductible will only be 5 times what it was.
And your deductible would be higher. And your annual out-of-pocket will be higher. Your co-pays will be higher. And interestingly, I've yet to be able to find anything about who are the providers. There's a link there, the list of providers and what the specific benefits are. Both links have been dead.
Now listen, Jim, I understand you were able to drill further into the healthcare.gov system than anybody I know, probably anybody in Michigan, at least that I'm aware of. Did you ever get to the point where you could sign up? Did you sign up? Yes,
I've picked out my plan, which I said is $16.50 a month.
Okay.
I've gone all the way through to the end where it says enroll, and I'm assuming if I just click enroll and it worked, I would be enrolled in the plan. But in fact, you hit it, it clicks you and sends you all the way back to the beginning. But it does show that I have chosen my plan. Even though I've not been able to find the providers, I've not been able to find the specific benefits. But I've gone farther than anyone I'm aware of. And that's why I said last week it was announced that the state of Michigan has enrolled zero people on Obamacare, and needless to say, I know that they're not enrolling through that in Medicaid because they can't. The system doesn't work.
Just to clarify, you hit enroll
about 55 times over the last 3 weeks.
Did you get anything in the mail, like welcome to the new program?
Nope, I got sent back.
No comrades are part of the group now?
Not yet, maybe.
Folks, we'll see you next Sunday. Thanks for joining us.